a newly developed baking process could lead to increased exports of Australian wheat. Although Asia's bread manufacturers favour North American red wheat, if commercial trials of the new process are a success, Australia could become the preferred supplier. This is the type of bread Southeast Asian bakers produce, a soft, light, spongy bread with good flavour and texture. And to produce it, they use a lengthy preparation process called sponge and dough.
The bakers actually mix about 60% of the flour and the water in a first stage of mixing, and they produce what's known as a sponge. Then that sponge is allowed to sit for a period of about 4.5 hours to allow fermentation. It's then added back to a mixer with the rest of the ingredients and processed as for normal bread. And so what that means is that the process is about 4.5 hours longer than the bread making systems we use in Australia.
Australian bread makers replaced the sponge and dough system with the rapid dough process in the 1960s. In response, our wheat industry supplied varieties best suited to this faster and more economical baking process. Meanwhile, the Asian bread market was largely left to the USA and Canada to supply with their red wheat.
The Australian wheat varieties generally don't have the tolerance to the long fermentation times that the sponge and dough market in Asia requires. And what we find is that therefore the bread doesn't have the same volume and the same texture as they get from the process when they use the North American wheats.
The problem is, while ever Asian bread manufacturers stay with the sponge and dough process, Australian wheat will continue to be excluded from a lucrative export market. And that's left local researchers with a new challenge. Either breed more suitable wheat, or, as the Bread Research Institute has done, develop an alternative baking process.
We've largely adapted existing Australian processes and just fine-tuned them so that we can get the bread quality that's suitable for Asian customers. And so that means it's a significantly shorter process than the sponge and dough process, so we've taken many hours of production out, and we've also been able to simplify the process while also building in some extra controls into the process to ensure that we get the results that we're after.
Bakers in Singapore, Malaysia and Indonesia were approached by BRI with GRDC support to gauge the project's potential, and the reaction was positive. By the end of 2010, 2 Southeast Asian bakers will run commercial trials. Commercial confidentiality means Groundcover can't disclose details of the newly developed baking process, but we can report some of the benefits.
Where wheat is going to Southeast Asia or parts of Asia for noodle manufacture, it will now be able to go with that extra or additional purpose of being suitable for bread making as well. And that's a real advantage to Asian millers, which means Australian wheat should be more valued in those markets.
BRI's baking process is focused on wheat in the widely grown Australian hard category with target protein level of 12.5%. And our wheat has other advantages over the red wheat supplied by the US and Canada.
Australian wheat's regarded as free milling, and by that we mean that it goes through the mill very easily, and it has a high extraction rate, some of the highest of all the wheats that we know around the world. But its big advantage is its colour, and that's why it is preferred in the noodle market, because if there is any bran contamination in the flour, because our white wheat has white bran, it doesn't discolour the flour.
And with Asia's bread manufacturers also being targeted by wheat exporters from Europe's Black Sea region, a baking process that helps secure demand for Australian wheat is another potential advantage from this R&D project that could see full commercial rollout in the not too distant future.
It's reasonable to look at somewhere between 2 to 3 years before this is really running commercially, but it could happen sooner than that if all the pieces of the jigsaw fall into place.